Should you buy an iPad that came out in 2012 in 2025? Maybe. This here is the 4th generation iPad, and it's actually pretty decent in 2025. Now, for specific people. First, let's just talk about it a little bit, because the iPad is such an interesting device in Apple's lineup, even today, but it was even more interesting back in 2010 when it first launched. When Steve Jobs first introduced the iPad in 2010, it wasn't the first tablet to the market, it wasn't the first product in its category, but there's one thing that Apple did better than any other company at the time, and that was make the best product in that product category. With the iPad, Apple didn't just want to make a bigger iPhone or a dumbed-down version of a Mac. This was something new. It was meant to bridge the gap between work and play, consumption, and creativity. It was a really interesting device, and still is today. Now, I don't have the 1st generation iPad with me, but I would love to get my hands on it someday. My dad had it, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Anytime I could go to an Apple store, I would play on an iPad. I thought iPads were awesome, and that didn't change with the 4th generation iPad. Now, when Apple first launched the iPad, it was huge. Not just like physically, but like people bought it up. It was the #1 product in that category at the time, and nothing else could come close to it. Everything else was really slow, buggy. The iPad just worked, but it was definitely a vision of the future, because we're now a lot of creatives or artists use iPads, or you might just use it instead of a laptop. People were still trying to figure out iPads in the early 2010s, but they really refined the iPad with the 4th generation iPad, which is the one I have here. This one has a Retina display, it has a Lightning port, and it honestly just feels nice. It feels premium, and in 2025, it literally still works. Right now it's running iOS 10, and yes, it's not iPad OS, it's iOS. It used to just run a bigger version of iOS. By 2012, the 4th generation iPad hit the shelves. It had a new Lightning port, a Retina display that felt like you were looking at a printed page, and a chip that made it feel twice as fast as its predecessors. The A6X chip. It made the iPad capable of handling apps and tasks that were really unthinkable a couple years before. So let's talk a little bit about that Retina display, because it was a game changer. I have another iPad that is activation locked, but you can take a look at the pixel density here. It is terrible. You can really see it, and with the Retina display, that changed everything. The Retina display made the iPad so much more usable. When you looked at a non-Retina display versus the Retina display, you could tell. Photos, videos, games really came to life with the Retina display. It also had a camera and a FaceTime camera, which weren't necessarily new to the 4th generation iPad, but all of those things together really made this thing the best of the best for iPads. And so the reason that I'm making this video is because when I watched Mr. Who's the Boss's video looking at all of the generation of iPads, I was really surprised how much nostalgia that I had for iPads, and it just kind of got me excited about older iPads. And so now you're probably wondering why I would even ask the question if you should get an iPad 4th generation in 2025. Well, here's the thing. I have kids, and there's a pretty big market of tablets for kids on Amazon. We've used them, the Amazon Fire tablets. The nice thing about them is that they're very, very cheap, and they have a really nice replacement policy. Like one of ours broke, and they completely replaced it for free. And they come with really nice cases so that the kids can throw them around. It's great. But they are ungodly slow. They are the slowest things in the world. They're infuriating. And so the crazy thing about the 4th generation iPad is it still feels fast today, even though it's not running iOS 18 or iPad OS 18, I guess. Which there's an issue with that. You can't download a ton of apps on it because they're not compatible with iOS 10. But there are a few apps that are compatible with iOS 10, and thank you so much, app developers, for this, because I don't know why you're thinking of still updating your stuff for iOS 10, but thank you. And the battery life on this thing is fantastic. Like over 10 years later, it's fantastic. the standby time. You can put it down, pick it up a couple days later, and it'll still have a relatively full battery life. And it's not just YouTube Kids that works for this. Amazon Prime works for this, and then a couple of other apps. You might have to see if the app works or not, but the fact that at least 2 video streaming apps work for the 4th generation iPad is insane, and they work really well. So if you're in the market for a tablet for your kid, it might not have to be the 4th generation iPad. Look at the 1st generation iPad Air. Look at the 2nd generation iPad Air. Look at some older Apple devices that used to be the top tier device with the top tier specs, because I guarantee you it's going to be a lot faster than one of those Amazon Fire tablets or something else. But it's also going to be around the same price. You can find old iPads for relatively cheap. What if you don't have kids, or you just don't want to give your kids a tablet because you don't want iPad Kids, which is fair. The iPad 4th generation really holds up. The screen is nice, it's snappy, and you can still find a few apps that work for it. Now, like YouTube doesn't work for it. I don't know if Netflix works for it or not, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to get a 4th generation iPad in 2025. Now, when you compare it to the latest iPads, yes, it does look almost barbaric with the giant bezels, the thickness, and it's relatively heavy. But there's still something to appreciate about the design. The way that it feels in your hand, even with the thicker bezels, it's not bad. It feels nice. I could definitely see myself, if I was a little more into reading, which I wish I was, reading a book on this, even watching a movie on this, I think is not a bad idea, because that battery life still lasts so long, even 10 years later, which really impresses me. Comparing it to the latest iPads today, it's not gonna really hold up design-wise, or even speed-wise, app-wise, anything-wise. It's not going to really compare. iPads today are incredible. I don't have an M4 iPad to compare the thickness to, but even you can see with the M2 iPad Pro and the iPad 4th generation, the thickness is definitely different. But the 4th generation iPad was a solid iPad, and it's still solid today. So if you want to pick one up, do it. They're all over eBay. Check on Facebook Marketplace. Just make sure they're not activation locked. If you want to get one just for nostalgia purposes, or if you want to get one for one of your kids or something, I think it's a solid thing to pick up in 2025. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.